Hi everyone, Jaren here from the Imaging Resource, and in this video we're going to take a look at the Sony a7 III's video capabilities in 4K. Now before we get to nitpicking all of the footage and really taking it apart and deciding what's good and what's not, I do want to make something clear. This is an excellent video camera. In 4K, the a7 III makes really crisp, clean, sharp video. Colors look really good. It tends to lean towards blues and violets rather than greens and oranges, so you do get a somewhat unique perspective. Out of the box, it comes equipped with both S-Log2 and S-Log3, and in 4K you can shoot in 24 and 30p in two separate bit rates, so one of them is 100 megabits per second, the other is 60 megabits per second. And one more thing worth noting about the footage you're looking at is it was all shot handheld. I could not use a tripod in this aquarium, so what you're seeing is how good the in-body image stabilization can be if you have a nice firm stance and are holding the camera relatively still. I'm going to let some more footage roll here so you can really get an idea of what this camera can do, and then we're going to take a close look at several of its individual features. So what I want to do here is show you the difference between shooting in the a7 III's standard picture profile as compared to shooting in S-Log2. And in this clip, this is in standard, this has not been color graded, this has been taken straight out of the camera. And what you can see here is that the colors have a kind of, at least in my opinion, they kind of have a purplish hue to them. The greens are nice in the background, but the skin tones themselves, they have less yellow than they do have purple. And another thing I'm noticing is that the blacks here are very black. They are what I would call almost crushed. The contrast between the window and her dark shadows, you can just see how the camera is giving preference to the highlights so as to not blow them, but it will crush the blacks instead. For comparative purposes, let's see how the Panasonic GH5 handles the exact same scene with the exact same settings. In both these cases, I used auto white balance because I wanted to see what the camera thought was white in this scene. And we noticed in the previous one that we're getting more purple color, and this one we're definitely getting more green. This whole scene is very green. It's more green than I liked, but I left it because of test purposes. You can see here though that the depth of field, of course, as expected, is not as deep, and the highlights are a little bit more blown. That said, the shadows have more detail, and that will become more apparent as we look at the log as well. So let's move to the log profile for Sony. So here we have the S-Log2 on the Sony with no color grade on it, and even here in the log you can see that the highlights have more detail than the shadows. If you look at her shirt and in the background, there's almost no detail there, and the highlights in the window are actually quite well exposed. So as we drop a Rec 709 LUT on this, you can see that it tries to go basically back to standard, but with a little bit more range. The shadows are again crushed, and the highlights have a lot of detail, but that's what we were expecting here, really. So here is the GH5 again for comparative purposes, and I can already tell this is going to be green, and oh, there it is definitely still green. However, the highlights are well blown out, but the shadows have much more detail. It's a very interesting shift from how the Sony seems to be treating the exact same scene. Another feature that's generally awesome to have on all of these mirrorless cameras is in-body image stabilization, and here you can see what the IBIS looks like on the Sony camera just walking handheld. Now I want to compare that to the GH5, which also has IBIS, and you can see that though the Sony does have some stabilization, that when compared to the Panasonic GH5, it's not quite as good. It's definitely there, but the GH5 is doing quite a bit more to reduce the amount of shake you get with regular walking motion. And here are the shots side by side so you can get a better idea of the kind of image stabilization you're going to see out of both in the exact same situation. It's worth pointing out again the color difference here. The GH5 seems to like green and the Sony really likes purple and blue. You can really see it in the siding of that wood on the building in the background. One of them you definitely see blue, and the other, you don't really see it at all. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to play for you ISO examples all the way from ISO 100 to the top end in video, which is 102,400. I did not show each individual ISO setting that the A7 III has because there are a great many. I chose instead to show the considered full stop ISOs between 100 and 102,400. I wanted to do this in the dark so you could see a reveal of how much light is being let in with each stop, and it will also show you how much noise is introduced as we increase the ISO. As a note, I think that this camera does extremely well all the way up to ISO 6400. After that, it still does a pretty darn good job. It's just not as clean as I would like for professional use. However, when shooting at that high of an ISO, you'll still manage to get the shot and it will still look pretty good. So having the option to go higher and see in even darker situations is an absolute great thing for anyone shooting video with this camera. Even at the maximum ISO, I'm not seeing a lot to complain about. It still looks pretty good that high up, which is unusual for any camera. There's noise introduced, absolutely. It's less sharp, absolutely, but it is not bad looking by any means. It's definitely better than I've come to expect from modern cameras. And finally here we're going to take a look at the quality of each of the 4K settings, 4K P24 at both 60 and 100 megabits per second, as well as 4K P30 at 60 and 100 megabits per second. Now right about there, you should see that at 30p there is a slight crop in when compared to 24p. This has always been baffling to me when it came to Sony cameras shooting in 4K. All the alpha cameras seem to do this. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it's kind of annoying. Can't really shoot in 30p if you want the full frame look. That aside, if you were curious what the two bitrate differences do, that may not have been enough to really compare, so what I did here is I put them side by side in the 4K P24, and then I zoomed in at 200% so you could try and see a difference. It's not a big difference to the naked eye. I can't really see it. I'm sure there's something in there, especially if you were shooting in log or planning on grading later. You definitely want the higher quality, but for just regular use, it's not a big shift. For more information on the A7 III, as well as a full breakdown of its video recording capabilities and an analysis of them, make sure to read our review at imagingresource.com.